Hello, 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 hello. Um, Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wellness Wednesday. We are just about rounding off this calendar year. And as we look towards the end of 2021, going into 2022, we are excited for what's to come. And we are also very tired. We are fatigued. We are just trying to do life as we have since 2020. So that means, this time of year, we're planning for the holidays, family get togethers, school breaks, vacations, and we have big question marks hovering over our heads, and headlines, especially local headlines, really add to that noise with COVID in Minnesota leading the nation in highest rates. We're entering flu season, another year of the pandemic and everything else. And we were all just doing our best. I promise that this will not be a pessimistic Wellness Wednesday. I am just stating the facts, ladies and gentlemen. But we're all just doing our best, but sometimes it is hard to do our best, much less feel our best, when our bodies start to slow down, and not in like a chill, meditative kind of way, but more of an involuntary way, slogging through the days with random jolts of pain or discomfort in the stomach, a loss of appetite that can lead to weight loss. I have a sick baby downstairs. Chronic tiredness, no matter how many hours of sleep you get or naps you've squeezed in. And while some of these symptoms are pretty common in today's day and age, they can also be indicative of something greater. And that can be, as we will be learning today, chalked up to a thing called adrenal fatigue, which we will get into shortly. And just as a PSA for all of you out there, no matter if you walk away with this kind of type of diagnosis or not, dragging through the day should just never be normalized. We all know our baseline, and it's so easy to get caught up in the day to day, but losing sight of what healthy feels like can be really harmful and come with long-term consequences. Adrenal fatigue is a really controversial term, and that's mainly due in part to the fact that conventional or Western medicine just doesn't acknowledge this as a legitimate condition. You type those two words into your search bar, and a bunch of websites that read something to the effect of adrenal fatigue, is it real, will populate in your browser. And there's so much overlap between symptoms of depleted adrenal glands and other conditions, and there's no known test to confirm it, which Dr. Rattay will be getting into shortly here. Blood tests can't pick up on adrenal production. And I did a little bit of research this week. So for a little history lesson before we get started, the term is actually relatively new. It entered the alternative medicine vernacular in the late 90s. A doctor that coined it, I think his name was James Wilson, a naturopath. He says it usually goes hand in hand with really intense stress. And that's a thing that we can all relate to these days. And that people with it may not show actual physical signs, but they just feel tired or gray, no matter how much sleep they get, and something about only having an appetite for salty snacks. I guess I've been having adrenal fatigue for a long time because I've loved Cheez-Its since I was 5 years old. But anyways, I digress. So our guest for today is Dr. Paul Rattay. He will be touching on this and all of your adrenal related questions. We have featured him on a Wellness Wednesday before. He's become kind of our de facto gut health expert, and we featured him several times in print. He's a functional medicine doctor, and Dr. Rattay, correct me later if I'm wrong, but I think one of only two at Northwestern Health Sciences University. And he specializes in thyroid diseases, autoimmune disorders, adrenal fatigue, and like I said before, gut health, and so much more. It's not even funny. He's a jack of all trades, and he's a master of all of them as well. And we are always so excited to talk to him. He has the best energy and one of the most smartest people I've had the privilege of knowing. And so before we dive in, Northwestern Health Sciences University is based out of Bloomington. They're in our own backyard. They're kind of a hidden gem, and they are the leading chiropractic school in the Midwest. They offer all sorts of degrees in natural/integrative health, and their clinic is open to the public, and they offer a whole array of natural healthcare services, like acupuncture, cupping, Chinese medicine, massage therapy, and there's more where that came from. The faculty and the providers are all major industry experts, thought leaders. They are blazing the trail for natural health and just revolutionizing the ways that we perceive healthcare in general. So before we get started, one quick housekeeping item: be sure to drop all of your questions or your comments in the Q&A, and we will do our best to get around to all of them. We strive for this to be extremely conversational in nature, so jump in at any point because we'll be covering a lot of material. And then without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Rattay to today's session. Look at that. Right on cue.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Jamie. You're much too kind in your introduction. If my wife heard that, I'm not sure she would necessarily agree, but yeah, that's fine.
Okay. That's okay. Our partners like to humble us and do things for them. So welcome to the chat today, Dr. Rattay. First things first, before the questions start to swim in, because I suspect that we're going to be seeing a lot of that, because adrenal fatigue is so cloaked in intrigue and mystery. And like I said before, it's sort of a more novel term. Can you just give us like a layman term, sort of a boiled down definition of what it is, and maybe even more importantly, what it's not? Sounds kind of like a rule of elimination type of thing.
Right. So when it comes to physiology, anatomy, pathophysiology, if we start talking in big medical language, nobody understands us. So we have to try to simplify it. So that adrenal fatigue is really a simplification of something that's happening, right? It's a real thing. It just, like you said, it doesn't exist as a diagnostic criteria. I think what's important is to really look at the stress response. Right? So the stress response, we link stress to the adrenals, but really it's the stress is related to a very complex function called the HPA, right? HPA axis, right? HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. And now I've already lost everybody when I start, So let's just focus on the adrenal. But really what happens is the adrenal gland secretes quote unquote stress hormones, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, mineral corticoids like aldosterone. So these are secreted by the adrenal gland, and it's just, we kind of blame that. So we say, oh, it's the adrenal gland, but it's really this organization of a response that's going on. So it starts in your brain, it then goes to your pituitary, and then to the adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys. And then there's the secretion of stress hormones. And then we just kind of want to go right to the adrenals and say this is fatigue and this kind of thing, whereas we really need to look at this kind of balancing act that works in the body. And keep in mind that we talk about this term homeostasis, maybe you've heard. I like homeodynamics better, which means the body is constantly trying to regulate. In other words, when you're confronted with the bear in the woods, your body goes into an alarm state to say, hey, I need to be alive, 10 minutes from now. And then hormones are secreted, things are, turned on and turned off in the body as it should be. Of course, the problem is if that 10-minute stressor turns into a 30-minute stressor, it turns into a 2-year stressor, right? So then there's this constant stress that, again, is perceived by your brain, by your hypothalamus, that then says, oh, well, we got to kickstart and send out more stress hormones, right? So, and this can be depleted over time. So it's adrenal fatigue, right? So adrenals, meaning we're talking about the stress response. Again, I like HPA better. And then fatigue, by far and away, the most common symptom I see in clinical practice is fatigue, right? Number one complaint. And fatigue, due diligence, I want to make sure that it's not anemia. It's not iron deficiency, it's not B12 deficiency and folic acid deficiency, and that it's not a thyroid issue. But many people will test normal on that, but they still have fatigue. And then we scratch our head and say, well, what's causing that? And again, we're only looking at 2 different things that may manifest as that. On top of that as well, the adrenal gland or HPA dysfunction may be contributing to that is sort of a side effect of being in this, let's call it this exhaustion state. That is just the kind of the amplification of a process that, you know, maybe was normal 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, but now over time you've had this cumulative effect that now you can't really mount the same response. So I like the word resiliency, right? So resilience is this bounce back. So what I look for in patients is to say, what is your bounce back ability, right? What is your resilience? And if that's not happening, then we need to look at things that could be working on that. But at the end of the day, because I can't measure your fatigue, I have to like really say, so what is the resiliency? Have you been confronted with stress and it's not bothering you as much as it did, you know, last month? Then I would use that as a marker that there's been improvement. But again, no objective marker on that. That's me basically asking you and you giving me your subjective experience. But, you know, it's very important though.
So like you said, resiliency isn't something that can be measured. It's more of kind of just like documenting where your head is at in a way and how you respond to external factors over a period of time and seeing how you feel in comparison to how you did a few weeks ago or a few months ago. Is that what you're saying, Dr.?
Yeah, and keep in mind, so when we have a stress event, here's we have stress hormones, right? We go into this alarm stage, right? And that's basically the catecholamines or epinephrine, norepinephrine, or adrenaline. If we think of adrenaline, same thing, depending on what country you're in, we call it different things. So that's the alarm state. So that's like we wake up right away, right? That's within milliseconds of seeing the bear that we have to mobilize our resources. And the mobilized resources are saying, hey, I need a bunch of energy. I have to put that into the muscles. I need to shut down the digestive system. I need to shut down the immune system, because who cares about what's sitting in my stomach or if I'm fighting something, because I may not be alive 5 minutes from now. That happens within milliseconds, and that's the alarm state. And again, that'll happen, and then you get away from the bear, and then you'll kind of come back down to your normal, let's call it rest and digest state, right? So we got flight or fight, rest and digest. So we go up and down, up and down. The question is, you know, cortisol then plays a role in here. So adrenaline wakes you up, gets you going, right, within milliseconds, and then cortisol kind of takes over and helps you adapt to stress over a period of time. So if the stressor isn't resolved quickly, then that's the cortisol is maintaining that, doing similar things to adrenaline, but it's different, right? It's working it's stimulating different pathways. But again, the end result is to kind of get you back into this rest and digest state, right? So to be human is to be in rest and digest. And then we deal with the flight or fight that comes all the time, right? The being awake, being, you know, it's physical stress, it's emotional stress, it's nutritional stress, right? All those things will be fed back into your body to say, oh, wow, I got to respond to this, right? So when your blood sugar falls, this idea of hangry, right? That you get hangry, this basically this reactive hypoglycemia, another terminology that people will disagree and say it doesn't exist. But the idea that this hangry happens, and again, it's this stress response, like my blood sugar's falling. And if your blood sugar's falling, your brain says, hey, that's stress. I need to get the blood sugar back up, right? And that has nothing to do with the emotional stress. And so there's stressors from different things that are still interpreted by this HPA axis, and then getting to the goal to say, hey, I need to be able to, you know, get through the next 10 minutes, the next 3 hours, you know, what have you.
Okay, so you were just saying, Dr. Rattay, if my blood sugar starts to drop and I am in, you know, I've got the high stress response going in the background, that the hormones interpret that blood sugar drop as being another stressor. Is that what you were saying, and kind of just perpetuating the cycle?
Yeah, so I'm going to call that nutritional stress. Now understand that you have nutritional stress and emotional stress and physical stress. It's cold outside, you're sick, you know, this kind of thing. Wow, that's a trifecta, right? And those things kind of they accumulate, right? So it's not just one individual thing, it's how you're trying to balance that scale, right? I always use a scale in clinical practice. Homeodynamics is this idea that you're constantly trying to balance, and then things will happen. So you put weight on your scale. And when you're resilient, it doesn't matter, right? You don't get sleep, or you stay up all night and you're 22 years old and you're like, well, I can do that, right? I'm more resilient. But then when you're 50 and you do that, you're like, oh my gosh, right? Or we go drink alcohol and you're like, oh yeah, I could drink alcohol. But then you're 40 and you're like, wait, I can't drink alcohol like I could when I was 20, right? But again, the idea is those are things that are tipping the scale, and you get to a point where that scale is tipped so far that then we sort of see the symptoms from that, right? Whereas the body is constantly trying to keep this in balance. So blood sugar, if you went high and then you came crashing down, that's going to be a significant burden on there. That again, if there's not other things going on, it may not be a problem, right? But again, with a combination of other things that are weights on the scale, then we see some issues with that, right? That's where we start to lose resiliency. That's where kind of good stress turns bad, right? So we have this idea of eustress, which is actually beneficial. But it's when that good stress turns bad that we have a problem. And that's different for everybody, right? Where is that level where the stress now becomes detrimental rather than actually positive, right? So we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD. What's interesting when you look at this is there's actually post-traumatic growth too. You can see this, that there's actually people that get stronger when they're confronted with stress. And then other people, they completely fall apart when they're dealing with stress. So again, I don't know that there's some specific measurement that I have it. It's that, you know, that inner resiliency, and how do you do things to lighten that scale, right? And looking at all the other things in your life. And again, over time, we just accumulate weight on the scale, right? I mean, we become onions, right? Onions where I'm peeling off layers to see what's going on. Whereas I love seeing 7-year-olds, right? 7-year-olds, quick, they respond really quickly. They either get better, that, you know, it either works or it doesn't. Whereas when we've got, you know, 10 different layers going on, we got to peel through that, and we find emotional stuff, and we find all this stuff that we've accumulated over time. And understand too that the if we talk about the adrenal, or the just sort of the stress response, that we also remember, that we remember things, right? So there's what's called a flashbulb memory. So flashbulb memory, probably all of you know where you were when you heard about 911, when you first confronted when 911 happened. It's like it has this impact on you that gets embedded, like it's like you remember that. So that, again, the idea is the body remembers these things so that when they're confronted that in the future, that they can respond appropriately. So a lot of PTSD, for example, is it may be some abuse or something that's happened in the past, and something reminds you of that. And then when that reminder happens, boom, it's like, wow, I'm having this stress response, which is really just your body's attempt to say, hey, you know what? You've seen this before. This is a danger. You need to run or fight.
Got it. We got a question here from an audience member who is asking if tests for morning cortisol are useful in diagnosing or seeing if treatment for adrenal fatigue is working. Can adrenal issues show up in children? So this is kind of a two-part question. Can adrenal issues show up in children, especially if they had lots of medical issues early in life and have non-diabetic related hypoglycemia? Would an endo be able to address this, or another type of provider?
Yeah, well, so I have an endocrinologist friend, and if she hears me say adrenal fatigue, if I look at her face, I can see her blood pressure go up like 10 points. Right? I mean, it's clear, because she says, Paul, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And again, her perspective is, do they need to take a hormone, or do they not need to take a hormone? Do they have Addison's disease? Do they have Cushing's disease? Is this something? And of course, we want to know this. This is like pathology. But we have this sort of in between, this physiology, but branching to pathophysiology. And so the idea is that there's something going on, right? We see a symptom picture. And again, adrenal fatigue may be this idea that we can label it as something, or then we want to test it. So we can test cortisol. So the adrenaline that I talked about, not very useful to test because that is episodic. There's no rhythm to it. Whereas cortisol does have a circadian rhythm that is high in the morning, it's low at midnight. So oftentimes we'll use that as a tool to diagnose adrenal fatigue, but I don't think it's a good test to diagnose. It's a test that kind of tells me what's that circadian rhythm. So are you following a good circadian rhythm with cortisol? Now understand that you have a stressful day or a non-stressful day, whatever that means, that's going to change those levels, right? So then I do that and I'll say, well, let's just take a normal day. Well, what's a normal day? And you may be collecting it and you're like, wow, I had a huge stressor at 3 p.m. And then your salivary cortisol would change on that. So it can be helpful, but it's really not diagnostic. The other thing is we do something called a cortisol awakening response. So what happens is typically they'll do a 4-time salivary sample. And that's pretty convenient because you can do it at home, which is better test than just doing a single cortisol that they can do in a blood screen. Because you get a blood drawn, it's just telling you your cortisol at that moment in time. Whereas the salivary can be measured, over a circadian, over a day, and then useful, right? You can collect that. Cortisol awakening says now I'm actually testing your cortisol right when you wake up in the morning. And the funny thing is after you wake, the cortisol still rises for about 30 minutes and then it starts to come down. So we look at the first morning waking and then 30 minutes later, and we want to see actually a higher spike there. Again, not diagnostic, but it may tell me, wow, your adrenal glands aren't responding as well as I would like them to be. Again, it's not that you need to take a hormone. It's not that there's some, diagnosis that we're going to make, except we're like, yeah, maybe that, that HPA function isn't ideal. And what would be even better is that I knew what you were 5 years ago, and then I knew what you were last year, and then I compare you to this year, right? But keep in mind again that the level of stress that you have in any given day will throw those values off. So if I do that, I've always got to read that with a grain of salt and be careful that I'm not just clearly just saying, oh, here's what you have and here's what you need to take it. But see, we love tests though. We love tests that are in black and white, or not even black and white, in color, right? I mean, my panel's color, it gives you all these things. It's, oh, wow, you may have this or you may have this. And I look at that and like I said, useful. But again, I look at that and say, is it going to change my treatment? Because I often know from talking with people and they give me a history, like I'm going to support adrenal function with them. I don't need a test to diagnose that. It's not going to change my treatment at all. So does that mean I need to do the test? Am I trying to confirm something? Am I trying to convince the patient that they need to be involved in this? I mean, great if that's what you need. But I usually have the perspective that I can kind of look at that onion and figure out where we need to focus on. And really the adrenals are not usually the cause of the problem. They're an outer layer, maybe not the outermost layer, but they're somewhere sort of in between.
Got it. So in a way, Dr. Rattay, would you say it's just kind of a matter of unlearning? I mean, it's been, a lifetime of going to the doctor, getting blood tests and different screenings and being told we have X, Y, and Z, and then just kind of being comfortable, getting to a point where you're comfortable with you may have this or you may not, but also kind of in a way that would empower me to take a stronger or active role in my health goals, if that's making any sense.
Yeah, we call this practice, right? Practice doesn't mean that we have the definitive answer and there's a standard of care. Again, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that that's one approach and we want to rule out pathology. But if there's not pathology, where do we go then? Right. And the thing is, we tend to go to Western medicine first instead of saying, wow, are there lifestyle interventions? Are there things that I can do, that I can change, that I can take control of because I'm in the driver's seat and I can see a change in my symptom picture? And keep in mind, right, I live in a gray area, the gray area that I don't know that it's going to work, but I do know that I understand the framework and I can say, well, let's try this for a month. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't fit, then we need to try something else, but it ends up being practice. And again, conventional medicine, it's not black and white, so they really don't go there with that, right? Because there's not first of all, there's nothing to give you per se, right? There's no drug that's going to fix that. I mean, you could take cortisol, you could take adrenaline, but those are going to be in severe pathology states where we do that, which the endocrinologist will know that, and they look for that. But it's this in-between gray area that we're like, well, don't worry about it. Whereas I'm going to be like, yeah, worry about it. You're not functioning properly. Can you do something different and see that translates to improvement?
My question for you is, when you treat patients, and I know that's kind of I don't know if that's the proper term because it's not really treating, it's kind of more
Teaching.
teaching and reiterating maybe or confirming their suspicions. But when somebody comes in, do they suspect they have adrenal fatigue, or is that something that it's just, again, a rule of elimination and you kind of eventually deduce that that could just be the problem since we've ruled X, Y, and Z out? What are you
So I
kind of
think that we use adrenal fatigue because people know about that. So if you come in and I say, oh, you have adrenal fatigue, and people feel so much better because somebody's validating them. Right. And again, I want to validate to say, okay, but let's talk about what adrenal fatigue is. And it's not that there's some simple herbal formula that I'm going to give you that's magic because, you know, you want more energy, you're tired, and what can I give you to have you keep your foot on the accelerator, right? This is the problem in this culture of ours, is that we do things and we push ourselves and we push ourselves and we push ourselves, and we never get back to rest and digest, right? And we go to sleep at night and we expect rest and digest to happen, but rest and digest should be happening during the day. Sleep is a recovery phase. And then, I mean, I see so many people that they can't sleep, and then it's like, oh, well, you know, I take melatonin and CBD oil and theanine and, you know, all these things, which is fine, but I'm just treating the symptom here. Again, you're in flight or fight response while you're sleeping. You know, you're dreaming about work and everything that's going on. You're not dreaming about pink elephants and purple giraffes, right? So the idea is that we got to figure out how to down regulate that during the day so that we see the sleep improve, right? Or how do you take your foot off the accelerator rather than what do I need to take to keep going, right? Whether that's, you know, and again, we tend to be addicts with adrenaline early on, right? We drink Red Bull, we drink coffee, we do those things, we get a hit from it, right? We get a hit, we're alive, we're alert, we can keep going. But eventually we're gonna pay the cost of that. And when you're 20, you're like, oh, nothing's ever gonna happen. And then accumulates over time, right? And then we just don't pay any attention to it until now it's really impairing my day-to-day function.
would you caution that if you don't step in and kind of intervene, you know, and look at yourself and do some self-reflection, how am I feeling today? How was I feeling last week? Da 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 da. I mean, do you think that we're straying further and further away from what our baseline was like, particularly like pre 2020? What are your thoughts around that, Dr. Rattay? I mean, is that kind of a harmful thing? I would suspect that the longer that you're in sustained stress, I mean, it's like what you said, loss of appetite, everything else shuts down, right? So
Right.
what could that lead into anything? Not to scare anyone, but I mean, I'm looking for a cautionary tale here, I guess.
Yeah, so weight on the scale, right? So it's going to have some effect on your resiliency. And some people it will not affect, and other people it's going to affect dramatically, right? And so it's not so much that that's the cause, but it's just amplified that. And now the stress of work or whatever stress that is with that tip scale, now you can't manage it, right? So then we say, oh, well, I need to be able to get through this, instead of saying, well, how do I kind of down regulate and deal with these things that are on my plate, right? And I think that, you know, that's a big thing with the COVID, right? I mean, the sense in the pandemic is that how do we like get to the point that this is what I need to do to take care of myself instead of this fear, right? So fear is what I really worry about, right? So the fear thing is we're fearful, and fear is triggering the HPA axis, right? It's a survival instinct. And when we're constantly in fear, we're constantly secreting these stress hormones that are telling us run, fight, run, fight, run, fight. And we're not running or fighting, right? And on some level, that's why exercise is very beneficial, because it gets you to externalize the stress response. So people always say, oh, I feel better when I exercise. Because again, if there's a buildup of stress hormones, your body's saying run, fight, run, fight. And if you run or fight, then it's like, hey, I'm doing what my body's telling me to do. The bigger problem, though, is how do you down-regulate that stress response? How do you get to the point that you're not constantly in the flight or fight? So we manage the flight or fight instead of really saying, how do I take inventory of this? What do I do that allows me some time and space to down-regulate that, right? And whether that, I mean, exercise could be that way, but oftentimes that's, you know, doing, you know, spiritual work, where, you know, doing things to, you know, meditate, to pray, to do things that get you to be present but not constantly in flight or fight, right? There's this idea of flow. There's a book written about flow, which I love, is that you get caught up in doing something and 3 hours passes and you're like, wow, it was 3 hours, right? You could be painting, you could be playing the piano. It could be, I mean, I have a patient who paints rocks. And that's like my first question that I ask her, because I see her every so often. I'm like, how many rocks have you been painting, right? She's like, oh, I haven't been painting rocks lately. I'm like, already I know, right? That's her meditative practice, right? And it's doing something that's creative, doing something that's expression, that we need to do that this way instead of like just taking in everything that's going on in the world around us, right? And how do we compartmentalize that fear, or understand that, yes, there's truth to this, but I also have to figure out where that balance is.
So in a way, there is some productivity there, right? Where if we channel that fear, if that's what you want to call it, into exercise, meditation, rock painting, I mean, those are situations in which we are doing our bodies good, right?
Correct. And I understand it's the down regulation that's the harder point, right? Because we just learn at an early age. We move, push, 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 push all of the time. And there's never any place that we, do we actually play? Like, we understand that we're human beings, we're not human doings, right? And it's always a sense of, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? What do I have to do? But maybe there's just a being part, or at least to allow that at least 15 minutes a day, right? To be in the being, or I like human becomings, if I were to change the word. Like, what are we becoming? And how do we, focus our energy, or do something that, what is it? What's our potential? Right. So again, we get caught in the rat race, we get caught in all these things, and it just further spins, right? This isn't new. It's just that COVID has amplified this. The pandemic has amplified it for a lot of people, right?
That's the title of your forthcoming book, Dr.
Oh,
Rattay.
yeah, the book thing, right?
Speaking of which, I was Googling you, and there's a Paul Rattay that has a few books on Goodreads, and I thought
It's not me. I'm a talker, not a writer. Oh.
Speaking of books, Sarah wants to know, you referenced a book earlier. I think you called it Flow. Is that right?
Oh,
She
flow, yeah, and I couldn't
the
tell you the
author.
author because it's a long Czechoslovakian or Eastern European name. But if you find it,
Sam,
it's
would
on
you
there.
Sam, would you mind looking that up and dropping that into the chat box for everyone when you get a second?
Yeah, and he's probably got YouTube. I mean, it's an older book. I'll tell you another book that I just absolutely love is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's by Robert Sapolsky. And he's best speaker that I've ever heard. He teaches at Berkeley or somewhere out, University of California, somewhere out there.
Yeah.
And he's not a clinician, no clinician, but he studies the chimpanzees in Africa, and he goes there and he's measured their cortisol levels, and he finds they have a pecking order and how they beat up on the ones that are below them. And actually, if you're a chimpanzee, are you at the top or the middle or the lower, right? And if you're the lower, you're getting beat up by everybody, and you don't have anybody to beat up on, right? And that becomes a problem. And you look at this, you're like, wow, is this the same thing in humans, right? And he just really talks about that whole that stress, kind of the physiology in very layman's terms. That's very useful. Again, not clinical, not here's what you take for it, but let's try to understand that, and maybe there's some lessons that we learn and how we learn to downregulate and do these things, right? Being human, right? I mean, that's part of it. It's not just how do we fake ourselves through this, or what's the latest greatest magic supplement that's going to fix that. I mean, I use supplements are helpful, but they don't fix it, right? They're always working within the context. If you're not working to do something to downregulate that stress response, to take your foot off the accelerator, you can do all the adrenal support and adaptogens in the world, and they may help, but they're just surface, right?
Got it. This was a question that we received in advance of today's session, and this individual wants to know, Dr. Rattay, if adrenal fatigue plays into postpartum depression or anxiety, aka the baby blues. And I kind of added, I piggybacked off of that, is adrenal fatigue, the stress response, HPA, is that associated with, is it safe to say that that's associated with other major life stages as well?
Yeah, so let's talk about hormone balance here, right? So this is another big topic. So hormone balance, again, we have this idea that, okay, your hormone's imbalanced, you need to take something, right? So your DHEA, that's a adrenal hormone. Your DHEA levels are low, so take DHEA. Your estrogen levels are low, you can take estrogen. Your thyroid hormone is low, you need to take thyroid. Again, it's not wrong, but what's important is to try to figure out how they all work together, kind of this web-like influence. And as I said, it's HPA axis, right? So hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. Well, guess what? There's a hypothalamus pituitary thyroid. There's the hypothalamus pituitary reproductive hormone, right? Ovaries and testes, right? Then we see insulin playing a role in this, right? So all these hormones. So already the brain and the pituitary are not only responding to the stress hormones, but also to the thyroid hormones and the reproductive hormones. And when those levels are off, your brain may, your brain may sense that and say, hey, we got a problem here. I mean, thyroid, perfect example. So thyroid, I mean, many people are diagnosed with hypothyroid, and I mean, Synthroid or levothyroxine is probably the #1 most prescribed medication in the United States. It's dirt cheap because it's been around forever, but because there's a thyroid issue. Now, the interesting thing is that that exists, but it's possible that the stress response or your cortisol or some of these stress hormones actually feed back on the conversion to the active thyroid hormone and will slow that down. So it's almost like when you're under stress, that the stress is so excessive that it'll actually tell your thyroid gland, hey, turn down the metabolism a little bit, which seems counterintuitive. You're like, well, I'm trying to run from a bear, but it may be this adaptive stress that's going on, that you're actually down regulating your thyroid function because there's the stress response that's going. Same thing with the reproductive hormones, right? So the baby blues, I mean, your hormones are shifting, right? And again, I see this really big in perimenopause as well. But when those hormones are shifting, again, the brain is constantly saying, hey, am I normalizing this properly? Hey, I need a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that. And then, the stress can kind of interplay with that, right? And then insulin too. So blood sugar, I mean, I'm a huge, like, get your blood sugar under control. Like, that's probably the simplest thing you can do, or the nutritional stress, like take charge of that, because that may have, that may overlap into a lot of different things, right? Whereas, again, the thyroid and maybe your reproductive hormones, you can't beat them up so much, right? If you beat up your thyroid, you're going to have symptoms. If you beat up your ovaries, you're going to have symptoms. If you beat up your adrenal gland or your pancreas, your blood sugar, it's kind of like, oh, no big deal. The body keeps going. It's till it gets to a point where you're like, well, now I'm not able to adapt like I used to, right? This took a long period of time instead of something that happened abruptly. And yes, Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience, that is the right book. And yeah, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Sapolsky. Those are the two. Great. And Robert Sapolsky, you can find a series that he's done, I think, great courses where he kind of outlines that, or you can listen to that kind of thing. Oh my gosh, he's fantastic. I can't recommend his stuff enough. So
great. I have a question, and that is, okay, so we have to kind of contend with what we have right now. And what I mean by that is that, you talked about fear and how that's such a trigger for HPA, and that's kind of the climate that we're living in right now. Whether
yes.
we like it or not, we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and that's, it's impossible to not be impacted by that in one way or another. And so we're working through a pandemic, we're going to school through a pandemic, we're shouldering, a lot of childcare responsibilities. I mean, it's not news that our lives have been completely upended. Would you say that down regulating at night or for sleep, is that maybe kind of the first place that we start, Dr. Rattay? Is that more low hanging fruit?
Yeah, so I think that if you don't sleep, you don't function. Right, so sleep is where all the repair, rejuvenation, this is where your immune system is most active, your detoxification system is most active. All this is going on when you sleep. So if you're not sleeping, you're not giving your body the opportunity to do those things, right? Kind of that restore piece. So yes, if you're not sleeping, how do we approach that? Again, like I said, you can take things to help sleep, but again, sleep hygiene is a very important piece of this too, right? So sleep hygiene, we tend to have very poor sleep hygiene in this culture, right? That we push ourselves, we go to bed too late, we get blue light at night, right? And blue light, not good at night, but blue light in the morning, good, right? We want light in the morning. We don't want it before we go to sleep, right? We need to make our bedroom like a womb, right? Like a cocoon that you go to, that's not where the television's going and other things. Like that is where I go to rest and repair and do these things, and to go to bed the same time of night every night, right? To get in some kind of rhythm with that is so crucial, right? And that has nothing to do with how much melatonin and CBD and all these other things that you do. So that's a really important kind of lifestyle perspective to say, what's my rhythm look like? And then again, like I said, to do something during the day so that it's not spilling over into nighttime, right? So I see people that they have no problem falling asleep, but within 2 hours, boom, they're up again, right? And I'm like, so what's going on? What are you dreaming? Like, what's happening? And, and we come to this sense that they're just basically in flight or fight response, that they wake up all of a sudden at, midnight and they're in flight or fight. And we're like, okay, well, so how do we manage that? And I don't know that all the melatonin in the world is going to fix that. I mean, so again, it's due diligence, of course, that I want people to sleep, but it's not often as easy as just taking something. Now, taking something and following sleep hygiene and spending a little time during the day to reflect on that, now we're talking. So I have this little thing called the Oura ring. Do you know the Oura ring? So the Oura ring, it measures heart rate variability, and it's not a perfect thing, right? I'm kind of a technology geek, but what this does is it tracks my sleep, it tracks my quote unquote readiness, and it tracks my activity, right? And I get very interested in this idea of heart rate variability, which is basically the variation in your heartbeat. And typically we'll do a heart rate and we say, okay, you have, however many beats per minute. And that's fine. But more importantly, what's the rhythm that happens in that time frame? So oftentimes we talk about the heartbeat, it's lub dub, and we say, oh, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. But honestly, the heart's going to do lub dub, lub dub, lub dub, lub. So it's not consistent. And actually, the more regular it is, that's the more you're in the stress response. That's more an indicator of flight or fight. Versus if it's more erratic, it's more you're in flight or you're in rest and digest. Because when you're in flight or fight, you need to take charge. The heart needs to say, hey, I'm producing the oxygen. I need to produce that energy for the cells. I got to do this on a regular level. And the flight or fight system takes charge of that and gets it very rhythmic, very regular. So actually having more irregularity in your heart rate is quote unquote healthier. And I don't mean healthier, but meaning that there's this more of this, let's call it rest and digest. So this is just like wearable technology, right? So I have this constant feedback of which I don't think it's 100% accurate, but it still gives me a framework, right? And so for my sleep, I'm always interested in my sleep. Like, how many hours did I get? How much did I move around? What was my heart rate? And again, I think it's an approximation, but having that information I can use and say, wow, I didn't get a good night of sleep, right? And honestly, I wake up in the morning and I know that, but I also know things that I can do that'll trash my sleep faster than anything else. You want to guess what the number one thing you can do to trash your sleep is? And again, this isn't true in all people. I'm generalizing, of course. If I want to trash my sleep, the easiest way for me to trash my sleep, what do you think?
To trash your sleep?
To trash my sleep, that I guarantee you that I will have very bad sleep numbers the next morning.
Oh, phone in your bed?
Alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Alcohol, oh my God. The trashes my sleep quicker than anything else, right? So again, it's just like, it is what it is. And again, I have something that, maybe keeps me honest, that just says, wow, I'm interested in some of that feedback, right? And you can do things with heart rate variability. There's companies out there that do that, where you actually, like, where you put your finger in a monitor and it records that, and you color in the screen, right? And as you're relaxed, the screen gets colored. And then as you come out of relaxation, then the screen goes black and white again. So there's like tips, there's tools and things that you can use to really try to engage that, to say, quote unquote, how am I doing? And again, I don't need that to know that, but sometimes it's good to have that feedback to say, oh yeah, I need that reminder, and I need to slow down, or I'm going to take a moment, or, I'm going to take a nap, this kind of thing.
Yeah, in a way, I kind of view that as like accountability for yourself. There
Correct.
just it forces you to be a little bit more awake, a little bit more aware. That's really interesting with the variability, Dr. Rattay. I thought it would for sure be the reverse. Like,
Yeah.
if it's
Yes.
consistent, you're good and a-okay and whatnot. I did see, I think, speaking of wearable tech, I don't know if it's Apple Watch or it's something from Apple where heart rate variability, I guess, is starting to also like detect COVID in some people, or not
Mm.
detect, but it's supposed to become like kind of this big marker in the medicine world.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that we want to jump to diagnosis on it. And I
Yeah,
don't think it's a really good diagnostic tool. But what it is it gives you some reflection on how is that stress response, how are you responding? And again, over time, it may be valuable because it compares you today to you yesterday instead of some statistical norm that says, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, right? So if you're
right.
using it as a tool for yourself, I think there's value there. That probably if there's a night that says you didn't get good sleep, you probably didn't get as good a sleep as you did on nights that it says you have better sleep. Not that it's perfect, and I know
Right,
exactly what my levels were, right? So
right.
I do think that you can get that kind of information and it may tell you something, but basically you're a little bit stuck in the flight or fight response.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're such a society of absolutes. It's really hard to get out of that. We have an audience question, and she says, I have had history of HPV. Um, to note, I recently gave birth and experienced some major stress and PTSD due to a genetic birth diagnosis. My thyroid hormone test also came back out of range. It was low. My question for Dr. Rattay is, can HPV return and adrenal fatigue and thyroid be related? I may need to make an appointment, but thought I would ask here.
Yeah, so of course adrenals and thyroid are related. And again, the question is which one's more important? If we see low thyroid, I absolutely think this is something that needs to be supported, but that's like I said, I think the thyroid's here, the adrenals are here. And HPV is just another manifestation of that. I mean, it's virus, and the whole idea is how does the body like get that immune system to just shut up that it's not an issue, right? So this is part of, this delicate mechanism or the body balancing on so many different levels to kind of keep the virus to be quiet, to kind of regulate that. The way I look at the thyroid and the adrenals somewhat is I think of the thyroid as a thermostat and the adrenals as the furnace. Right. So think about it this way. So the thermostat, if you change the thermostat, you're going to have significant effects on the heat or not heat. Right. So, and if you take a hammer and bust the thermostat, we got a big problem, right? No regulations going on in the body. I'm not sure this is a perfect metaphor, but I think it's somewhat. Whereas the furnace now is the adrenals is putting out the energy and that kind of thing, and not just energy, but that the thyroid feeds back from what's going on in the furnace, right? That there's a sense to say, oh well, we turn it on, but we don't keep it on, and we turn it off. So the furnace, though, if we're doing things and it's going all the time, and then we kind of lose this feedback mechanism, right? Or the furnace starts to affect the thyroid, and then we test the thyroid and we find, oh, you're hypothyroid. And true, I mean, not that that's not an issue, but I mean, I've seen many people that take thyroid hormone, it helps maybe a little bit, but their problem's not completely resolved. There's still underlying things going on. And keep in mind the adrenal and thyroid are like this, right? So that I absolutely want to look at that. But other things can certainly affect thyroid function too, like heavy metals and, you know, other things that can impact that thermostat for all intents and purposes.
Thanks, Dr. Rattay. We have 11 minutes on the clock. So you guys, if you have any questions, now is your time, Dr. Rattay. Like I said, I think you are just one of two naturopathic doctors at Northwestern.
That's right.
So it's hard to get seen by you. In obviously the best of ways for good reason. There was another thing that I wanted to run by you, and this is the article that you were sourced in recently that inspired today's session about, you're not imagining it, adrenal fatigue is a thing. And in there, you talk about following the rule of 1869 when it comes to your diet. So 1869 as in the year. Can you Can you Laura Ingalls Wilder on that for?
Yeah, 1869. So that is a year that margarine became commercial. It was commercially available. And I mean, that's not the only thing, but margarine is just a perfect example of a manufactured food, right? And I'm not quite sure it's food, right? I mean, we take things and we put it together and we can spread it on our toast, but that's kind of the beginning of it. Also, it's the beginning of finely milled flour. So I apologize, we're in the Twin Cities and this is Pillsbury and General Mills. But if you've been to the Mill City Museum, right, I go in there and I'm like, oh, this is the beginning of the end. So I don't go in there with really happy thoughts. I go in there and I say, this is the beginning of industrialized food, where they developed the technology in the 1870s to finely mill flour. And finely milled flour, they take soft wheat and they were able to use that for many different things. So they're able to make Bisquick, they're able to make cereal, they're able to do things with flour that they weren't really able to do before. Whereas it used to be you ate bread and you made the bread, or maybe somebody else made the bread for you, but you either ate bread, right? Or different kinds of bread, but it was basically that thing. I mean, we'd make cakes and other things too, but understand there was not that initiative that we can put it in a box and put it on a shelf and make it very easy, convenient kind of thing. So that's where my 1869 comes from, right? I'm not and so basically I say, if the food didn't exist in 1869, you shouldn't eat it. And keep in mind, I'm not a sugar fan. We ate sugar in 1869, but we didn't eat as much as we eat today. So I think going a long way is to ration your sugar intake too, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, we talked about that too. I I'm always interested when I talk to experts, and to me, I mean, they are such beholders of knowledge. And I mean, you speak so eloquently to adrenal fatigue, but so many other things. Dr. Rattay, can you just kind of give us a day in the life? Like, how do you, what does a day in the life look like for Dr. Rattay? And I know you're going to say no 2 days are ever the same, and I totally get that. But do you feel like your body is at a state of homeostasis some of the time, or probably not most of the time, right? That's not very realistic.
Yeah, so I mean,
Do you work harder? Is this a lifetime of like building up to where you're at now, in terms of what you eat, what you put in your body?
yeah, keep in mind, I would be considered a food Nazi at home, right? So that if anything's going on, I'll be like, what did you eat? It's something you ate. And I know that's not true, but I'm very hypervigilant about, and I mean, my wife as well, right? We share this as well, that
That's good.
very hypervigilant about what goes on in that kitchen and, food that rots, and really looking at that. I mean, I have friends that are even more foodies than I am, right? So, I mean, I certainly have some vices. I mean, I grew up on cereal, right? I mean, I grew up on General Mills and Pillsbury. And so, I mean, I'm sure there were days that all I ate was Honey Nut Cheerios. Yes. And not a good way to start your day. And I would say, at the very least, if you have to eat Honey Nut Cheerios, don't start your day with them. You'd be better off ending your day with the Honey Nut Cheerios, right? If I want to be simple. Or you could eat grape nuts, or you could just eat a piece of fruit, right? But anyway, so that, I mean, that certainly goes on. I'm also an intermittent faster, right? I'm a big fan of going longer without eating, but partly that's about how do you set up your life and your diet and things so that you can skip meals instead of saying, oh, I'm just not going to eat. So that's about, I don't think I've eaten breakfast in 10 years. So I just ate breakfast with my family on Sunday, right? So occasionally I do that, but for the
Wait,
most
you
part,
haven't had breakfast in 10 years?
oh yeah, I probably ate breakfast, less than 20 times in the last 10 years. And so,
Why?
the problem is I teach and I tell students, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but
Dr.
I'm being a
Rattay,
hypocrite. I'm being a hypocrite, but no, you got to,
you won't have cake on your birthday, but
no.
you'll skip breakfast.
Yeah, but so the thing is, it's breakfast is the most important meal of the day, not to screw up.
Yeah.
Right? So not eating doesn't screw up breakfast. Eating Honey Nut Cheerios with skim milk
Oh,
and
gotcha.
toast and orange juice is a bad way to start your day. And many people can start their day with that and be okay. I'm just worried about how long can you get away with that till that becomes a problem. So
So you're
There you
saying
go.
you're better off not having breakfast than having breakfast if it's going to be high in sugar or carbs or saturated fats or whatever.
Yeah, and I
So
mean,
what does the perfect breakfast look like to you? Like what would you, if you had breakfast tomorrow and you were in charge of preparing it?
something that focuses on protein
Okay.
and or fat, right? And it doesn't need to necessarily be keto, but that the carbohydrate would be in the background. So there's also this idea of carbohydrate cycling, which I kind of follow, that I think is actually helpful for the adrenal gland. So I can bring this full circle. So carbohydrates, so understand I said if your blood sugar's low, your adrenals will start to get stressed. You're activating this whole axis. So the thing is that we don't want your blood sugar doing this, right? Because you come down, now you're triggering your stress response. You start your day with a bunch of carbohydrates that are easily digested and don't last very long. Again, it could be as simple as just making sure you eat fat with it or protein with it, that may mitigate it. But eating carbohydrates by themselves puts you up here, and then 2 hours later you start crashing down, and now you've triggered your adrenal glands to say, whoa, now we got to regulate the blood sugar, right? So instead of doing that, just flip it around and be, low carb in the morning and actually eat those carbs at night. Beneficial at night. They'll actually help increase your serotonin level. They'll help you sleep. So carbs aren't the bad guy, but I think we certainly eat them out of context, and we eat them timing wise, perhaps poorly, right? Instead of just saying, oh, I need to be on a ketogenic diet. I mean, most people don't need to be on a ketogenic diet, but many people would respond favorably to rationing some of their carbohydrates and saying, maybe I won't eat so many in the morning and I'll eat more at night. So the simple version is just flip breakfast and dinner around. Eat dinner for breakfast and breakfast for dinner. If I did nothing else, I think many people would feel much better if they just did that. There's really simple. In fact, you can buy the reverse diet, right? There's a popular diet book that's, I don't know, 300 pages. And basically you're going to pay $26.95 to have somebody tell you eat dinner for breakfast and breakfast for dinner. I mean, I don't need to buy a $26 popular diet book to tell me that, but maybe I need it for recipes and exercises, and I don't need to be motivated, but really just eat dinner for breakfast and breakfast for dinner, right? I mean, use a $26.95 for your, gym membership.
Oh,
Not for a latte though.
oh, I love it. Just trying to recover from all of this.
Oh yeah.
Carbs at night are okay because they're easier to process when you're sleeping too. Does that play into it as well?
True. And what happens, your cortisol goes up while you sleep because it's trying to regulate your blood sugar. Now, if you wake up at 2 a.m, wide awake, and you're starving, we got a problem, right? But most of the time, that's not what's happening. And eating carbohydrates at night actually increase serotonin. The insulin does this, right? Insulin increases serotonin transport into the brain, which is beneficial, right? So that's actually that late cycle during the day from about 3 p.m. to midnight that you'd like to have the serotonin or try to boost that. So eating carbohydrates will help that, right? So.
Okay, this is our last question before we wrap up, and this is from one of our audience members, Jen. For your perimenopausal, that's a lot of syllables for me today, patients that may also be experiencing adrenal fatigue symptoms, is estrogen ever something you prescribe?
So I'm a little scared of hormones, so I generally don't use them. I may use, and I can't prescribe estrogen in Minnesota as well, but DHEA I can use, which is a precursor to estrogen. But here's how I think about it, or here's my, again, a really general thought on this. So perimenopause happens, and now the ovaries are going into retirement mode. So the ovaries aren't really producing it, but the adrenal glands still produce estrogen, or they produce DHEA, which can be turned into estrogen. So you don't go to zero estrogen, you just go to non-reproductive levels of estrogen. The thing is that if you've had stress for years and years and years, who hasn't? So the thing is that you may have some adrenal dysfunction, HPA maladaptation, and it's really not a problem while the estrogen levels are here. But as soon as the estrogen levels start to come down here, now you're exposing an HPA, an adrenal response that's not working very well, and now we have a problem. And we tend to say, oh, it's an estrogen issue, so just take estrogen. Estrogen may help that, but I worry about potential side effects. And I mean, it's a risk, it's a risk benefit when we get to estrogen. But I think that looking at the adrenal glands and saying, well, how do we help regulate that, often can lead to improvement that we think it's an estrogen issue, where it's just estrogen has revealed the underlying layer that's been silent for a long period of time. I consistently see that if we did an adrenal profile, a salivary cortisol on perimenopause, menopausal woman, perimenopause especially because the hormones are fluctuating, that we'll typically see low DHEA and a poor cortisol awakening response. But I kind of know that anyways, right? So, but again, DHEA, you can blood test for DHEA, which I like, right? And so it doesn't have to be a special adrenal test for that, right? I mean, you can just get that done on a regular blood panel. Though they don't routinely do that, but you could ask for that, right? So DHEA sulfate specifically is the test that I like.
Dr. Rattay, there are a lot of big words being thrown in today's
Uh-oh.
session, but I'm following, I think.
DHEA. So DHEA is not DHA, which is fish oil. DHEA is a hormone. It's a precursor to estrogen and other hormones in the body, and it is produced by the adrenal glands.
Is there a certain supplement or brand that you would recommend for anyone?
Well, you can take DHEA is available over the counter. Oh man, I don't necessarily want the supplement industry controlled, but having access to DHEA, and people are like, oh, it's the anti-aging hormone. Oh, more is better. If a little bit's good, let me take a whole bunch. I'm very cautious with that. I never use the doses that you'll see in the health food store. I start very low and gradually increase it. So I'm very careful with that. And I test the levels too before I do that. So, I mean, that's just a level of caution, right? Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe, right? Just because it's available in the health food store doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. So
sure.
Though I don't necessarily want the FDA telling me I can't take vitamin C and I can't do N-acetylcysteine and I can't do these things. But on the flip side, I think there's also some due diligence here.
Sure.
So.
Okay, we are at 1:02. It has been 60 minutes exactly. Do we have, that's from MSP. So if you go to the chat box, there is a link there where you can register for next month's Wellness Wednesday. That is with Paul Rattay's colleague, Dr. Amrit Devgan, and we're going to be covering Ayurveda. I never know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, that's right. And she's smarter than me.
Oh, come on. It's not a competition, Dr. Rattay. You guys.
It's not a competition. It's just the truth.
You guys are both extremely fascinating. So Dr. Rattay is always so special to have you, whether it's on the big screen or it's in print. You've brought so much to the table for us over the years. So thank you for being a part of this today. Adrenal Fatigue. We did that post with you and it just went gangbusters. And we knew that there was more where that came from. So I'm glad that we were able to have this opportunity today. This webinar, just like all the others that's recorded, it's there permanently. It's immortalized into the YouTube. I'm sleep deprived, so things are just happening. Anyways, if you
have HPA dysfunction.
I have HPA dysfunction.
Maladaptation, maybe.
We all do. So yeah. Anyways, that's going to be on our Wellness Wednesday page, which will bring you to our YouTube page, and you'll see all the archived episodes. And again, you can register for next month. I believe it's December 20th. Same time, same place. Again, major thanks to you, Dr. Rattay, for being here and for the gift of knowledge and time. And then we always want to thank Northwestern for sponsoring our great series. And our door is always open. So if you ever have any questions or comments or recommendations for a future session, do let me know. And you know what, there's still people on the line here. Are you taking people right now, Dr. Rattay?
Oh yeah, I see people. I have a very part-time practice because I'm sorry?
You want to advertise that or?
Oh, sure. I mean, you can find me if you just search on my name. So it's paulrattay.com. Okay. You'll find me. My website's really crappy, but it works.
Okay.
I mean, I do this, I spend most of my time teaching. I do still see patients, on an occasional level, and I enjoy seeing patients, so they keep me honest, right? So I like that I have one foot in the classroom and one foot in the clinic. So
all right, and I will type should I type in your Northwestern email address into the chat box for our?
yeah, you could put the Northwestern email or my personal. Yeah, Northwestern email is fine.
Perfect.
Great.
That's
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate your organizational skills because I have none.
I don't either. I'm glad that
Oh, well, you have more than me.
I'm just really good at BSing. I got that trait from my dad. Thank you, Dad. Anyways, thanks
All
again.
right, Jamie. Yeah,
Always
take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.